Welcome back to Redefine Parenting with your host, Veenu Keller. We want to welcome you to Spanglish World Network and her network on Zingo TV, channels 250 and 251. Zingo TV is a free app that can be downloaded on iOS and Android devices. While you download, make sure to rate and leave a comment. Zingo TV is also available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire and Fire Sticks, Roku and Roku Sticks, and all smart TVs 2016 and forward. Redefine Parenting is a revolutionary approach to nurturing our children. Veenu will bring you live experts, transformative insights, and a fresh perspective, all aimed at helping families worldwide truly understand their children. Together, let's give them a childhood they won't have to heal from. Hello, and welcome back to another amazing episode of Redefine Parenting. I have the honor and the pleasure of having a fabulous guest that I met through a platform, and we got on a conversation. I'm like, oh my goodness, I have got to have her on my show because she comes with an abundance of knowledge that she too is teaching families, teaching parents so they can have a better relationship. And as you guys know, as the host of Redefine Parenting, that is all that I want. I want to be able to help families break the generational gap of parenting. And so I bring guests such as Brittany herself to come here and kind of give us, her ideas of how we can do that. And so she has created the 4 A's: awareness, acceptance, alignment, and authenticity. So without further ado, Britt, let's just dive in and let's talk about this program that you've created for families.
Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. It's been lots of years in the making and kind of on my own self-awareness journey and my own parenting journey and figuring that out and kind of finding where all of that fits into what I want to do with the rest of my life. But I had the pleasure of having you on my podcast, the Odd Mom Pod. I haven't released the episode yet, but we have discussed, and it's going to be coming soon. I'm starting grad school in the fall, or in 2 weeks. And so I'm taking a little break, but that will be coming soon, and I'm so excited to kind of chat about all of the things and jump into it.
Beautiful, beautiful. So when you were talking, we talked about like different elements that help parents to really see their kids, to really look at what's going on in their lives and to actually connect. And I think that's one of the things that you and I agreed on, both of us being parents, is that, how connection seems to get missed. Like connection with kids is like, did you do your homework? You need to get up and do this. You need to come to the dinner table. It's like a commanding style of leadership in the homes. And you and I were talking about like there's different ways that you can connect. And you said that you had the 4 A's, right? So let's talk about those. Like how did you create those, first of all? Like, were these like the 4 things that you realized that people were missing or needed to enhance, or how was this developed?
So it's actually like a crazy personal story. But I have a long issues of trauma, and really had to have a childhood that I had to recover from, which I love when you talk so much about how that being your goal. But I very much had a childhood that I had to recover from. And it took me well into my early 30s before I really started to kind of figure out myself. And I had all of these amazing things on paper. I had an incredible marriage. I had incredible relationships. I had an incredible job and all of these things. And I just felt like I feel like I was never really finding abundance or fulfillment in my certain circumstance. And it makes it really hard to connect with your kids when you're on this constant drowning cycle. And so it took me a lot of years of learning how to kind of reparent myself, shift the narrative in my brain from being a servant mindset to connecting to myself, and how important that connection is before you can connect with your children. And so in January of this year, I actually ended up in the hospital for 6 days with a onset of a very weird medical condition. We still don't have it figured out. I actually have surgery next week still to like get more answers. But when I was in the hospital for 6 days, I got into this mindset where I was really struggling with my past history of addiction. I was going through a lot in my personal life. I had just had a business partner embezzle $15,000 from me and my investor. And then my whole world medically was coming down around me. And I sat in the hospital room for 6 days and I just started writing. And I was just typing away on my computer, doing lots of different research and trying to figure out all these bits and pieces that I've learned to make it make sense to me and to kind of reconnect to myself in that moment so that I knew I could come out on top. And so I actually found this incredible study that was done about self-awareness because I started really looking into self-awareness as my first check-in, and that's where the first A comes from. Because self-awareness is, when we look at studies of self-awareness, those in leadership positions, those in
Right.
that have self-awareness across the board are usually more likely to be happier in their life, be more productive, have less risk of depression and anxiety. But when I was really getting into the meat of it, I actually found that in research that those who harness self-awareness but do not harness self-acceptance are actually triple the risk of anxiety and depression.
Wow.
So that's where that acceptance piece came into. And so I started really delving into the research of what had been done among self-acceptance, and I found this incredible research article done on the importance of self-connection. And they broke it down study by study about how what self-awareness is and how important that is to be aware of our visceral emotions and what we're going through, and how if we can tap into those, we can start to see how we respond and react, and in what ways and why certain circumstances may make us react in a certain way. But if you don't get to this acceptance piece where you can look at all of these pieces and say, yeah, those exist, those are part of me, they're not going anywhere. How do I get to the point where I can say, ooh, that's something I notice that's off about me, but not necessarily degrade yourself for it? Um, and that's when I really started to do some more research into the self-alignment piece, which is getting that self-awareness, being aware of all of those pieces, accepting those pieces of you, but then really starting to change your actions and live at those pieces of the core parts of you versus what society expects of you or what you are supposedly supposed to do based on certain relationship circumstances. And specifically in parenting, when you hit this alignment portion and you really are able to start connecting to yourself, being aware of moments in your parenting that are really difficult for you, and accepting that they're difficult for you, but then taking it one step further and trying to accept and understand why those are difficult for you. And once you can really get to that acceptance and awareness piece, it's a lot easier to align and catch yourself from those like toxic behaviors or those generational curses that we so easily fall into as we respond to our children. Um, and so that's alignment. And those were the three pieces of the study of self-connection, right? Self-awareness, self-acceptance, self-alignment. But I really found that I just didn't feel like that was enough. Like there was one more piece that you are comfortable living in that authenticity outwardly. And you are able to be an authentic leader, not only in your job or in whatever, but specifically to those that we manage in our home and how important that authenticity is. And it wasn't until I didn't realize I was non-binary or queer or anything until I was in my 30s, and it really kind of made me realize that if I wanted to encourage others to live in their alignment and in their authenticity, and I wanted to encourage my children to be able to live in that, and I wanted to create a safe space where they could be that, I had to be living that authenticity myself. And so March of this year, my whole world was upside down, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna come out and like be full out there with exactly who I am. And I was terrified. I lost a lot of business when I came out. I'm in Oklahoma, and so that is not a very welcoming place sometimes. Um, but I found through that and teaching my kids how to live in that authenticity, I've started teaching leadership companies and helping them to help with their employees, kind of starting to level up their leverage and living in those authentic oh my goodness, authentic positions. Goodness. um, you really kind of attract abundance to life. And over the last 5 months since then, my entire world has changed upside down to be the most beautiful, fulfilling, incredible experience. And now I'm getting to live my dream of sharing with others how to do that. And it's improved my work relationships and improved my marriage. Most importantly, it's improved my relationship with my kids. And I love when you talk about connection, because so often, in society, especially as the maternal role, we're meant to be there slaving away 100% of the time with our children, or we can easily lose ourselves in what we provide for our families. And so ultimately, like, I love just teaching people how to reconnect to themselves, connect to that authenticity, start to live in that. Um, and you'll find that the connection quality is so much better when you're able to come from a connected and aligned space in yourself before you come into these relationships with your children. And ultimately, then you're teaching your children these basic steps, how to do this from childhood. And that's how we prevent a childhood that we have to recover from. If we can teach our children self-awareness, and why do I feel this way, and why did that make me feel that way, and let's look at all of these pieces and, like, okay, so what actions are we going to take? If we reacted this way based on how we feel, how is that going to react to our life? Just teaching these basic steps. But often, especially when you come from a background of trauma, you're thrown into adulthood without any of these tools or background pieces. Or often, I know I personally had gotten to the point where I had completely shut down my own emotions, my own wants, my own needs to live for the others, because that's what I was told to do as a society as a mom.
Right, right. So you that's like a lot. Let's unpack some
Oh,
of this.
sorry. I'm like, I
No,
just get
no, it's so
chatty.
good. I didn't want to interrupt. I was like, oh my God, she's on a roll. I don't want to interrupt. Like, it's so good, so good. So let's just go back to awareness. Like, I feel like
Yeah.
awareness, I just, again, that's why I don't have my voice. I was working a leadership camp. And I think that one of the things that we taught them at this Global Youth Leadership Summit in San Diego was, number one, what are we aware of in our own leadership? What are we aware of in our environment? What we are aware of, what we're learning, and what we're teaching other people? What are we aware of how we're modeling in the world? Because someone's always watching us.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a student in your class, it could be a younger older brother, it could be a neighbor, it could be the kid at the store that sees you all the time because you guys happen to be at the store at the same time. Who you don't know who's watching you. So what are you aware of and it's self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Am I putting out love, or am I putting out anger? Am I putting out, kindness, or am I putting out hatred?
Yeah.
What am I putting out? And it's not just the words that I use. You know what? I'm a stickler on tonality now. Like, I'm realizing that sometimes I may be feeling one way, but I have to present this way. Well, my tonality always aligns, which is one of your things too. It aligns
Mm-hmm.
with the feeling I'm having. So I'm not even aware, being aware. And I think when it comes to parents too, is being aware of what our kids are trying to share with us. And do we already have a different mindset that it can't be this? So that's not what I'm seeing. That's not how it has to be, and it's giving them space. Like, I love, like you've touched on, in order to give a childhood, a child a childhood they won't have to heal from, is teaching them the awareness of who they are in this time and space, and to be proud of it and not have to duplicate someone else's personality because theirs isn't good enough. Oh, Johnny over there, he's getting straight A's and his mama said this, and this is how it should be. Instead of that, it's like, what should it be for your own child? We
Yeah.
don't need another Johnny. He's doing really good, obviously. We need your child to be them. And I think that it really, you hit the head of the nail when you said that awareness first.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and it's hard because, like, so many of us, who are raising kids now, we like I said, we've learned to completely blunt our awareness, right? We've shut down our even ability to feel emotions. I went through this incredible program about healing trauma about a year and a half ago. And on the first class, they asked me, list 3 things that you love to do outside of relationships with other people. So you can't list an activity that you do purely because you enjoy doing it with the people you enjoy it with. I could not list 3 things that I liked to do for myself. And it was this like, how? Like, I'm a whole grown human and I couldn't even know myself enough to know those pieces of myself.
Right.
And so I had to go on this entire finding myself journey. And it's so interesting because as a mom, when you do this, and especially when you're open about it, and I'm spending so much time away from my kids, right? Oh my gosh, you go to yoga 4 nights a week? Like,
Right.
what are you doing? But you know what? Like, I come back and I'm the best version of myself for my
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
And I can go through a really difficult meltdown. I was a foster mom for 3 years, and we've adopted our son from foster care, and he has a lot of trauma. And so with that has come a lot of difficult experiences and a lot of really difficult behaviors. And we had other older foster kiddos. And no matter how difficult my day got, if I could sit and control myself, connect with myself, get myself aligned, figure out why was that child's reaction so triggering to me, and why did that make me feel that way? That awareness piece is instantly like, okay, now I can change my perspective and look at why. And that's when you really get to that acceptance piece, is when you can not only be aware of the situation, but why, and accepting those parts of you. And that's, I think, the biggest part of it too, is that acceptance piece.
Yeah, acceptance definitely. And again, if when we go into, I'm just looking at your 4 A's because they're so good. The acceptance part, you know, when we, I think that's the hardest thing for kids right now. I
Yeah.
think it's like accepting themselves for who they are, not what other people want them to be.
Well, and how can we expect our children to do that when most adults in their life can't do that?
Right.
You know, like, we're expecting these children to have skills that most adults haven't mastered. And so when it comes down to like redefining our parenting or making a shift in our parenting, we have to do this work with ourselves first.
Right.
Because we can't ever expect our children to come out of an experience being more prepared to handle it than how we showed them how to handle it. That's not how you learn. Um, and so that's where, I have these conversations with moms and parents all the time about breaking down that mom guilt, so that way we can put ourselves first and be connected to ourselves and be accepting of those parts of us, be accepting of our pasts and what makes those difficult. And then it makes it so where we can actually connect with our children and understand, like, oh, my children's behavior made me feel that way because this specific screaming like this was a trigger for me, and I was never allowed to act like that as a child, or I would have been hit, kicked,
Right.
whatever,
Right.
like, there's always, and then you're like, why is that so triggering for me anytime that my child's having a freaking meltdown? And I'm like, it's because I have no idea how to handle that. I was never showed skills when I was having feelings like that, and I was shown how to shown how to shut up. Honestly, as a child, you are to be seen, not heard.
Mhm.
Um, and as even still, like, children are expected to not have meltdowns in the grocery store. Our children are not meant to be overstimulated or dysregulated. Our children are expected to sit in a seat for 8 hours a day in school. And we know all of these things are against our natural development. We know all of these things are against natural brain development. And we know that if we teach children different circumstances on how to navigate these experiences in their life, from school to work, we're setting up for success for life.
Right.
But why aren't
Right.
we doing that? It's so
Right.
frustrating.
And it's funny because you talk about like kids and having behaviors like, in the grocery stores and stuff. And I can't tell you how many times I worked with kids on the autism spectrum when they were younger. And one of the places I took them was grocery stores and restaurants. And because the parents just wanted to have normalcy. And I'm like, we can have that. We just have to desensitize your child.
Mhm.
And and this guy walked by our table. I'll never forget it. This was a long time ago. Like I'm talking like, I don't know, 20 years ago. And this guy walked by the table and he says, if that was my kid, I'd beat the beep out of him. And I'm like,
Thank God he's
well, thank God
not
it's
your
not.
kid.
Thank
Yeah.
God it's not. And the mom's looking at me and I'm like, you know what? Don't worry about him.
Mm-mm.
I said, maybe that's like, God knows what happened to his child, but your child won't be that way. Why would we want to hurt your child? Because he has something that he can't handle, and it's called overstimulation.
Mhm.
We have to desensitize him to this,
Yep.
and it's just, gosh, it's acceptance. It's like, you think these kids want to scream? Now
Right.
I get it. I do understand where kids have been trained that all you have to do is scream long enough and you get what you want.
Right.
I get that. But but hitting them is not the answer. There is a way that you could also train the brain to act differently so that doesn't happen,
Mhm.
right? So, but again,
Well, and honestly, that ties it back to the awareness, right? If we are able to start being aware of our own feelings in those situations and talking out loud what we're seeing our children experience, right? You see, I mean, this is something I do all the time with my kids. I see my child having a large emotion, big feelings. Ooh, you look really upset. That looks like you are feeling big mad. I would be really upset too if my toy got taken or if I knew it was time to go. It's okay to feel that way. But if we're feeling angry, let's try like clenching our feet or stomping our fists, but we don't scream at people and we don't hit. And at that point, you're validating, you're teaching them the awareness of, oh, this is what I'm feeling and why, because they can't name that. And if you can't name that for your child, how do you expect them to ever be able to name it and then be able to process it? And
and
so
to
when we,
match it, right? Like
yeah,
match, like anger. Okay, when I did that, that was anger. She called it anger. So I
hmm
know I can't hit when I'm angry. I can stop my feet when I'm angry.
yeah,
And we did that with our children. Like we have 12-year-old twins, and when they were little, it's like, you're having an issue right now. You need to go to your room, and that is your safe space. You could throw your stuffed animals, you could stomp your feet. What you cannot do is sit downstairs and keep yelling at your sister or
hmm
us. What you cannot do is put hands on your brother. Like, that's a non-negotiable. We understand you don't like what he did or what she did, and you need a space to get that energy out, whatever that looks like for you, with not hurting someone else.
yep,
And then we talk about it.
yeah,
It's like, again, identifying what it is
yeah.
and being
And
aware.
that's
It
where
goes back to
that
your awareness. It goes back to your awareness.
all about awareness because you have to be aware of a parent in that situation too, checking in with yourself when you see your child having this meltdown, spinning, difficult experience. As a parent in that moment, one, it's embarrassing as hell, right? Because everybody around you is judging you. Like somebody's gonna have something to say. But also, like, you start to have a visceral and emotional response that is
Right.
usually triggering from some way. Maybe it's not even triggering because of the way your child's acting. Maybe you're triggered by the rejection of everybody around you looking at you, giving you dirty looks, and that triggers your anxiety, and then we hype it up. But if you can be aware of like, oh, ooh, this is a triggering response for me consistently because of this, it breaks down that emotional visceral response where you cannot be aligned in your action. And essentially, that's that whole alignment connection is where you get so used to, I'm aware, I accept that I
Mhm.
feel that way. How am I going to act
Yes.
on it?
Yes.
Like that's it, it's repetition, and it's hard, to do that as a parent. But honestly, that's reparenting ourselves. We have to get to that level
Yes.
with where we can say, I wasn't taught any of this shit. I was not any of this as a kid,
Right.
and then you get out there and you're like, okay, now I'm in charge of all these small humans. I'm in charge of a team at work. I'm in charge of a business. I'm in charge of all of this. But if you're not able to connect and align yourself and accept those parts of yourself and take intentional action to live in that authenticity, you're never going to be able to inspire those around you to do it. And
I love that.
you're never going to teach the people around you how to do it. It's all about modeling, honestly.
I love that you just said that. And, you know, it you're right. The first thing is that we have to align with all those different parts in us, you know, and we can role model that to our kids too. But the other thing that I think is so important with alignment, now that we moved on to that, is how do we align with our kids?
hmm
And, we think, well, I've been your age. I know what it's like. No, we've never been their age at this time in the world.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what it's like. We don't know what it's like with all the social media and the new things that come up on social media and what people are doing with social media. We have a snapshot, like I do anyway as an adult. I have a snapshot in my office when I learn something, AI this and da 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 da. But I'm not out there with a device in my hand at school with other kids and the pressure and what people are saying and how to control that. I mean, it's almost like another tool of judgment,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we don't know what it's like. So hear your children and align with them, and they need to know that they're heard by saying like, I get it. I understand why it's awkward for you, and I would hate that feeling too.
Yeah.
So what do you want differently and how can I support you? It's like aligning with their emotion instead of, oh, you have no idea what it was like for me to go to school. That's what kids like. Honestly, when I coach kids, they're like, well, I talk to my parents and they're just like, well, you don't know I had it bad too. Well, you know what? I had it bad too. I was bullied a lot too in school, but I wasn't bullied in this time and day.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it's like to be bullied in this time and day. So I have to hear my kids and I have to hear what they're saying and I have to see what's showing up for them. And I have to also not predict what I need to do to support them. I need to ask them what
Yeah.
they need for me to support them. And that's where I feel like alignment is so strong when we're looking at our children on how we can parent them in a different way. It goes back now to the alignment. How are
Mm-hmm.
we aligning with what they want, not what we think they want?
And I love that you ended with that because that's the big thing with alignment in parenting, right? When we talk about alignment and self-connection, we're aligning our own awareness and um, our own acceptance, right, into our action. When we are working on alignment with our children, we are working on helping them to establish their own alignment. And as a parent, it is real hard when that alignment of your child is not the alignment that you thought or saw, saw or
Mm,
prepared for.
yeah,
But also, the other thing with alignment is that we are still providing a safe boundary, right? And we're
sure.
teaching our children how to do all of those pieces and teaching them how to be intentional in their action. And when they make a mistake in their action, we are teaching them how to redo it. Like literally, let's stop. I make my kids do redo alls all the time. I didn't like that. Let's redo that.
Let's
You're gonna
redo
tell me.
it. I
I'm
love it.
like,
Let's
no,
redo it.
that we're gonna redo that. I was like, I don't like that. We're gonna try that. Can we try that again? And then like that's instantly they're like, oh, but really, when it comes down to parenting and really being in alignment with our parenting, we have to look at alignment with helping our children meet their goals and meet them where they are. I say this in regards to parenting, but I say this in regards to everything. Every single individual human experience is 100% unprecedented. 100%.
Right.
There is not a single person with the same brain, genetic makeup, living the exact same circumstances at the same time period as you, experiencing the same internal and external pressures. When we can kind of start to look at it from that way, and we see that our children are living their own unprecedented human experience, and we treat them as such, and we help them navigate it as such, instead of trying to get them to align to our vision of their life or what we expected from them. That's when you really truly hit that alignment and authenticity portion of that parenting connection. Because until you're getting to the point where your child is able to live in their own alignment, they're never going to find and be able to harness the acceptance and the awareness that you've been trying to teach them. You don't come into alignment negating all of that. And when you are pushing your alignment and your goals and your expectations and visions, what you want for your children, you're pushing your alignment and not theirs. And ultimately, you're telling them and teaching them how to ignore their self-awareness. You're teaching them that their awareness that they do have isn't acceptable, and that it should be shamed, and that that wasn't an acceptable want or desire or response. And then you end up with an adult who is in the same spot that you are now, perpetuating generational curses, continuing to live that way. And so really that alignment in parenting is aligning and understanding your child as their own individual human, and helping them to meet their goals and the best things that they can accomplish in life based on their awareness and acceptance and not yours.
Absolutely. And and then going back now to that authenticity piece, it's who, I really feel that parents strive to make sure that their kids are set up to win through their own agenda, and that if their kid doesn't do it, what is that going to look like for me? And I know it. I lived it with my older boys. I'm like, you're going to go to college. I remember my older boy, and he's 30 now. And I've always said when he was a kid, you're going to go to college. You're going to go to college. And finally he got to high school, and he just did not like school. Neither one of my older boys liked school. He's like, Mom, I hate to break it to you, I'm not going to college. I'm like, oh, yes, you are. Oh, yes, you are. He's like, yeah, no, at 18, I'm not going. And because his birthday fell in March, he was 18 before he graduated. And I'm like, I really wish you would go to college. He's like, yeah, I'm not. And he didn't. And
Yeah.
he didn't. And I was like, oh my gosh, what's that going to look like for me? I failed him as a parent. No, I failed my agenda. That wasn't his agenda. And that's why I failed it, by the way.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh, round two, I get his brother. I'm like, oh, what college are you going to go to? He's like, oh, I'm not going to college. Like, I don't even want to be in high school. And he's like, and honestly, Mom, I'm allowed to drop off at 16. I'm like, no, you're not. Like, I draw the line there. You don't have to go to college. And he's like, see, I don't have to go to college. I'm like, and so he didn't go to college, but they're both welders. They both love what they do. My older son makes a great living for his little family that he has, and he's happy at it. And so I failed my agenda, but I was aligned with their agenda, and they are happy. And that's really, truly what we want. And honestly, when people say, like, how did you come up with this whole Redefine Parenting, is because I made the mistakes with my older boys. And now I have a redo with my twins, and I'm doing it differently now. My son says, you know what? The 12-year-old's like, Mom, I'm being the World Cup. I'm like, great. What do you need to do to get there? We get him extra soccer lessons. We do whatever we can. We buy him what he needs to do for soccer, because that's what he wants. And somebody says, well, you're going to invest all this money and tomorrow you say basketball. And I said, you're absolutely right. He could. And guess what? We will pivot. We will pivot. Yeah. We won't say, whoa. I put all this money into soccer. You said soccer. You're going to do it. That's just not us. But if you would have told me 20 years ago, I would have been that parent. I would have been like, oh, no. You choose it. You finish it. You're going to be in that World Cup, And that's where the pivot has to come. It's like, when do we pivot? When do we teach them what authenticity is? Authenticity is being you at any expense. Being true. I have a friend who their son, and gosh, I think if my memory recalls, he was like 2 years old, and he would just love to just wear girl clothes. Like, I don't know if he had a cousin or whatever, because they didn't have any other girls. But maybe he saw his mom dress that way, and like he loved bows in his hair and stuff. And this is like, seriously, this is like 16, 17 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe 14 years ago, where we didn't really talk about this. We didn't talk about, like, girls were girls, boys were boys, and there was no controversy about it. We didn't hear about it, right? And this guy is a special friend of mine, and he is like tattooed up. He has tattoo parlors. And I said, how did you do it? And he says, Veenu, it was hard at first. But he says, do I want to choose my ego of what I think it needs to be, or do I want to choose the love for my child and him be happy? And now that child is in high school, transitions, what did he watch? Oh, he was 2. He wasn't in school. His parents were definitely not pro this.
Yeah. I mean, and I talk about this from my own personal experience. I had no idea growing up that being non-binary was even an option. Like, that was not something that was discussed. It was not whatever. It was not something that was known about. It wasn't in the news that children were being indoctrinated at that point, right? And so I grew up and very uncomfortable and unsure of my body, and I struggled big time with a severe eating disorder through puberty, because the changes and feminine changes in my body were so horrifically dysmorphic to my body and my mind. And it was really hard for me. And it wasn't until I'm in therapy at 30 years old and we have awareness of all of these other things. And my therapist is sitting there and is like, do you ever wonder if we had talked about gender multiple times before this, but she was like, do you ever wonder if maybe that's why you struggled so much with body dysmorphia through puberty? And it was like a freaking light bulb. My anxiety, my depression, my eating disorder, my drug addiction. I dropped out of high school, ended up with a GED, all of this stuff. And I'm like, from body dysmorphia, from something I didn't know was an option. And if I would have, as a child, even just known that that was an acceptable option or that there were other people who had questioned that or lived with that, I don't know if that would have changed anything or prevented anything, but would it have given me a different level of understanding for myself? Yes. Would it have given me more vocabulary to try and understand why I was feeling that way about myself or my body? Absolutely. Would it have changed like long term for me? Potentially, honestly, if that's something that I would have known about myself and had been able to be aware of and be accepting of and been in a safe space earlier in my life, who knows?
Right.
But essentially, it boils down to is like we can't get to this point where we're encouraging our children to live in their authentic selves, right? We can't get to this point where we're telling people to do all these beautiful things and follow their own path and be connected to themselves, if we aren't teaching them how to get there, you know?
Right.
And if we're not modeling that we're an okay safe space. And for me, I'm very passing as a cisgendered female. 99% of people who meet me in the wild would have no idea that I identify as non-binary. But I don't identify as non-binary for anybody else. I identify as non-binary for myself. And I live in the authenticity and I am open in that because now I have people that message me all the time about how they are still living closeted because they're not in a safe space. Or, oh my gosh, I've been now married for 25 years. If I had any idea of what was out there. And I found this space in my early 30s. I was in a career that I thought was going to be my career for my life. I had been, I'm still happily married, but been married for 10 years. I had 3 kids at that time. And to sit there and kind of shift your perspective and go, is this really me though? Am I really living for me, or am I living to meet all of the boxes and expectations that everybody around me had put me in? And I found that I was really not living at my fullest self. And when I wasn't able to live in that fulfillment and that abundance and that acceptance of myself, I couldn't even meet my children there because you can't meet somebody where you aren't yourself.
Right.
And and so that's why I love doing what I do, and I get to talk with parents. I work with I'm an international board certified lactation consultant, and I have my own private practice. I work directly with very newly postpartum parents all the time, and that is one of the very first things I'll teach them, from a veteran mom to somebody who's new in the game. You can't lose yourself, friend. And I prioritize mental health, and we talk about support and how important that is. And if you have that from the beginning, right, you go in staying connected to yourself as your children become themselves, and you get to see their amazing little personalities start to develop so early. It really gives you a different gratitude and understanding and just love for all of those pieces of your child. And it really opens up a different love for yourself if you let it.
That was so beautiful. So beautiful. It's like, and you said something, it's like, if you can't live within yourself and own your own space, how can you meet somebody else where they're at, right? Like meet yourself where you're at. And I think that because of my generation, we've grown up to check all the boxes, to be what people want, that we don't even know what authenticity is anymore.
No.
And how to get there. And so then we're parenting through that. Like I tell people all the time, it's like when I parented my older boy, sorry, I had no self-worth. I had no self-esteem. I was like treading water just to survive. And that's what I parent them out of. So how were they supposed to have self-worth and self-esteem when I didn't model that for them? I was going through it myself, and I didn't even recognize that I was going through that. And if I did, I didn't recognize that that's what I was parenting them to be as well. And so it's so important that we find our authenticity. We find our voice. It's like more and more, that's one of the things about this camp I just worked at that's so beautiful, is so many of these kids were able to come out, to have a voice, to step up and take the lead of a team that they've never been able to do before in their own hometown. Feel seen, feel heard, feel accepted.
And valued, right? They now have a value as a leader.
Yes, just for being them.
Mhm.
Just for being them. The people that we would say, oh, they're the popular, loud ones. And then they're the quiet, shy ones. Those popular, loud ones were bringing the quiet, shy ones like, hey, we want to hear from you. And they're like, you want to hear from me? Okay, this is what I have to say. And they're like, that's so great. And then they get validated in that, right? They get validated in that what I said mattered. And guess what? Then they'll do it again.
Yep.
Because they're just looking to say, am I enough for who I am without having to change who I am?
Yeah. And that's where you really let my forays, I call them the forays of unlocking abundance, right? Because that's when you get to that abundance. Abundance isn't the having everything that you could have ever imagined in your physical possession. It has nothing to do with that. Abundance is a mindset of where you know that there is enough for everybody and that your needs are consistently met. And when you kind of get to this point where you can live in your own authenticity and you see that you living in your authenticity and somebody else living in their authenticity does not take away from you, your success, your light that you're shining in the world, any of that, you really get to this mindset where you really want everybody around you to find that and to live in that. And that's when you start modeling that and you get to that abundance mindset where there's enough for everybody and like we're all going to do great. We all have different needs, and I can look at your experience and you can look at my experience, and we may have very similar or very different experiences that we have maybe very similar or very different takeaways from. But unless you're getting to that point of like, I can live in that and I know that everybody else can live in that too, and it's not going to take away from me, you really start to kind of overflow that onto the people around you. And that's going to first flow onto your family and your relationships, with your spouses and your friends, but it's going to be so loud in your relationship with your kids.
For sure. Absolutely. And I love that. I love that. And because my whole thing also is not just giving them a childhood they won't have to hear from, but how do we create a open, safe, and trusting space for our kids to feel they can share with us. But here's the deal, and I don't care which parent says, oh, my kid tells me everything. Guess what? I'm one of those too. My kid tells me everything until they don't.
Yeah.
Until they feel safer with someone else. Not because they don't trust me, not because they don't love me, because they don't want to disappoint me.
Yep.
And they have a story in their mind of what may or may not disappoint me based on me telling them no, they couldn't have a cookie when they were 5. Like literally.
Yeah.
It could have been something so simple like that. They now feel like mom judged. So she definitely will judge on this. She didn't judge on that, but she might judge on this. So I feel safe telling this person. And that's why I feel it's so important that kids have someone besides their parents that they can openly discuss things with, and that the parents trust. Like, I trust you to talk to my kids. Like, I have a life coach for my kids. And I've said this before, like my daughter will be like, but you're a coach. Why don't you coach me? Because I'm mom first. And I don't want you to get trapped in your little body, things that you feel, things that you think, things that you heard, things that you want to say, beliefs that you have that you feel in any shape or form will be judged by your father or I. So you have this coach that you could tell her anything. And I know that she's going to guide you in the right way. And she's going to help you identify these emotions you're having. And she's going to validate that. She's going to tell you it is okay to feel that way. I get it. I felt that way too. And here's what I have found.
And that's what they offer. When you have somebody that in a safe space to have those communication, you're giving the child an opportunity to practice a response before they are actually in that situation. And in our society nowadays, so many people want to shelter their children from every experience, right? We want to shelter them. We don't want them to see anything before they're ready. And then these kids get into teenagehood, or they go to school and they're presented with these circumstances with no practice. Right. And how do we expect for them to make right choices with no practice. Like, that's insane. We wouldn't expect them to go out and score an Olympic goal with no practice. Why would we expect them to get into a school situation where they're very emotionally involved with everybody involved and expect them to make a choice that's aligned with themselves unless they've had practice doing it? And
Yeah.
so when you're giving them that safe space, whether you are a coach, whether you're a parent, whether you're an aunt, if you have children in your life that you are this safe space to, it's so important to teach those connections to yourself, because you're also probably going to hear things that may be difficult or traumatizing or triggering, or things for you that may elicit things. And unless you're connected to yourself, you have to be able to stay on top of that. But also, when you've done this work yourself, you've got the practice, you've got the reps. And then you can teach your children or your niece or your cousin or a child that you're coaching, you know what? This is really hard. This is how I found to deal with it. Maybe this will help you, maybe not. But it just gives like an open board for collaborating and working together to build solutions and giving them practice so that when they come into it, they are fully prepared to handle it and be intentional about their actions when they do come into these circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I feel like, when we dive back into your four A's, that if we follow those guidelines, that really will teach your kids that there's an open, safe, and trusting space,
Mhm.
because you can share with me what you want, and it's a safe place. And I even tell parents, I said, teach your kids that's a safe space. They're like, well, how do you do that? And I'm like, well, first of all, you got to create that trust between you two.
Mhm.
Somewhere along the line, there's a lack of trust, and maybe not in everything. Trust is a funny thing. I can trust you, but I don't trust you in this, but I trust you in that, you
Yeah.
know? And figuring that out is that clear communication, and letting them know that when they're sharing something and they're feeling judged, I tell my parents all this all the time, is that they have a code word, that, whatever that is. And in that moment you stop, and you don't say, no, 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 I wasn't judging you. You say, oh, tell me what I said that made you feel that way.
Mhm.
Take ownership. Take ownership. And then when you tell them that, you get to reflect on that. You get to reflect on, be like, okay, and that wasn't my intention. So let me use a different word. Is this word okay?
Yeah. Well, and in that, you're teaching your children how to mess up,
Yep.
because they're going to mess up. We are all humans. They're going to get in certain situations where they're going to respond inappropriately or wrong, or they're going to let a visceral emotion impact how they react, right? But creating a safe space is purely done by letting your children see your own mistakes,
Mm,
owning up to them, apologizing to them, and then showing them how you're going to fix it. When we're doing this own work on ourselves, right, and we're working through these 4As, or we're on our own little self-exploration journey, it's so easy to kind of cut our kids out of that, right, because we're working on ourselves. But you got to get to the point where you're able to communicate your thought process with yourself
mhm, mhm.
and thought process this with your child. And this is what I do with my kids. My kids can run down the 4 A's of abundance pretty much by themselves, because I can be like, hey, how are you feeling about this? Do you know why you're feeling that? What would happen if we acted on that? What would happen if we acted this way? And you're just essentially running them through the same 4 A's. And now every time they come into a situation, my kids are instantly going to think, why do I feel that way? Okay, am I going to act on it, or how am I going to act on this? It's that repetition. But my kids have seen me mess up. And when I mess up because I don't get it right every time, I'm going to tell them, hey, y'all, I screwed up. I got a little mouthy. I got a little angry. I need to take a minute away, because I didn't learn those skills as a child and I'm still working on them. But creating that safe space is creating a safe space for growth for everybody. And that
I love it.
means, yeah, it means being accountable for when you screw up too.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here. We're almost out of time. So if you could just tell our audience, if they want to find out more about the 4 A's in your programs, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I have my own podcast, The Odd Mom Pod. I had been releasing weekly episodes. We talk about various different perspectives in parenting with different professionals. Veenu and I did a episode that will be coming later this fall as well. There's 21 episodes currently up, and I'll be coming back in the fall after I get my life settled with school going back up. I am on Instagram, Britt Sandoval Speaks. I am on LinkedIn as Britt Sandoval. You can find me and my speaking opportunities on my website, brittsandoval.com. And you can book me there for speaking at parenting groups through students. I teach this to entrepreneurs, to leadership teams, all the way up into through corporations, because inclusive leadership is something that we all can learn to live on and live through and do. And then the oddmompod.com. So those are the main places.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And I'm excited to hear our episode because I know we had a really awesome conversation. If there's anything that you would leave our listeners with today, what would you like to remind them of?
Parenting is hard. Progress isn't linear. Every experience is unprecedented. Be patient with yourself. Give yourself the grace that you give other people. And know that growth is progress. And that creating a safe space for growth means being able to openly do that. And so don't be afraid to hide your journey or the difficult things that you're going through, because you never know who needs it.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you again for being here. And as always, for my listeners, be curious, not critical. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye. Us on another episode of Redefine Parenting with Veenu Keller. Follow her on Instagram at Veenu Inspires. To learn more about Veenu, as well as download her free ebook now, go to www.veenuinspires.com. This show can also be heard on Spanglish Radio Network. Please check out www.spanglishworld.ca for all your news and programming. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it.